Hi, and welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials. We're going to take a look at some everyday cybersecurity lessons that we can take away from this week's ThreatTraq stories. I'm here this week with Stan Nurilov, who was a guest on the show this week. Stan, let's talk about the story you told us about, which is about a phishing attack with used QR codes. Tell us first, for those who aren't familiar with them, what are QR codes?
QR codes are these images that you might take a picture of with your cell phone, and they translate into text or interactive links. You might have seen them in some advertisements.
There's little funny things like with the black dots and squares.
Exactly,
and
yeah,
it's like a postage stamp.
Exactly,
side, yeah.
yes.
So what was happening in the case here?
So some people might know about phishing attacks, which is like when you receive an email and it's asking you to do something urgently, usually resulting in asking you for your password or username or clicking on something. Well, generally, when those come, you get like a link to click on, so you can get to the phishing page. But in this situation, people were shown QR codes, which they would then have to use their phone to scan it. Now, the problem is that security devices might not be able to analyze those QR codes.
So they're not prepared for that kind of attack.
Exactly.
And you might fall for it because you're like, oh, this looks very official. This must be secure. It's got this cool looking code in it. I've never seen that before.
Exactly. And so you just have to be extra vigilant if you were to, let's say, look at something like that and it did take you to the link. Wherever you wound up, you'd have to be even more careful to make sure that that is something expected. You know, it also brings me to another point, which is if you did receive an email out of the blue with a QR code that you weren't expecting, perhaps that's not an email that you should take action on.
The very fact that it is something unusual should be a red flag to you that perhaps this is a phishing email.
Yes.
Right. And then once you go there, you want to check the URL, which can be a little difficult on a mobile device, right? Before you enter any data, you want to make sure I'm at the site I expect to be at.
Exactly. I think because the mobile device displays are so minimal or small, sometimes the browsers kind of hide the unnecessary space so you could see more of the website. But unfortunately, that doesn't allow you to see where you are. Sometimes you have to just scroll up just a little bit to make sure you're looking at the bar, the URL bar, so you could verify that you are where you expect, just like you said.
So Jaime Blasco had a discussion with you and Joe about threat intelligence. What is threat intelligence?
So during the course of doing security work, we kind of have to sometimes cooperate and trade information with others, other security researchers. And it could be information regarding malware samples or how they communicate or IP addresses they go out to. And it helps the overall security community in general to go against, I guess, the adversaries that are out there. Why? Because one person can't really do everything themselves.
But it only really works if everybody is really a good guy on the same side, right?
That's right. And the interesting topic that Jaime brought up is what happens if an adversary starts polluting the information.
And what they found was that adversaries are doing all sorts of things, like even false flag operations, like going in and putting in information that would cause people like you to attribute an attack to a different adversary than the one who really did it, just to throw you off their trail.
That's right. And so it's a common technique that we're seeing more and more lately because there is so much attribution out there. There's a lot of security vendors saying this campaign was maybe caused by this specific group. So the bad guys are looking at that. They're also reading the security blogs and they're also paying attention to this. So
if you're like me and you don't deal with threat intelligence every day, are there other bigger lessons that those of us can learn about who to trust online from this story?
I think in general, it's probably a lesson many are familiar with. It's just in terms of information and where you get it and trusting that information. So it could come to even like just shopping on different websites. I think a lot of us are used to just plopping into our favorite search engine, the thing we want to buy, and it might give you like 5 options. And you might see a website you trust with an expensive price or a website you don't really know about and it has a much more attractive price. You have to be careful. It might be better to actually click on the more expensive but realistic price from somewhere that you trust to shop online. So these lessons, they're kind of true in almost any interaction you have online or really anywhere else.
And lastly, Joe Harton brought us a story about vulnerable anesthesia devices. Huge potential there for something to go wrong. And what was the issue there? Was that these devices didn't require any authentication when they were hooked up to a network, correct?
Yes, when the devices were designed, there was not much thought put to how to secure them. I guess that wasn't one of the use cases. But because these devices could be connected to the network, let's say in the hospital, and maybe managed remotely, there is a potential of misuse. I think a lot of people kind of rely on a solid inner core inside their network. They have a strong perimeter security to make sure nobody gets in.
That's like around the entire network.
Exactly.
To protect from outside threats.
Yes.
Right?
But then they put these kinds of devices in their network. It could be devices like Joe described, but it could be anything like IP webcams that you put in your house, or even fire alarms that are connected to the network. These are all connected devices, and they might not have the same security controls. They might not have a password to access them, or they might have a default password. But if an adversary is able to infect one device on your network, or somebody malicious, you might have an insider, they're already inside your perimeter, they might be able to wreak more havoc.
And these devices in particular are very sensitive, first because of the possibility of the safety of the patient, but also I, for years, did videos for a medical device manufacturer, and what I noticed is the way they would log in and call up a patient is to enter the patient's name and birth date or social security number. That kind of sensitive information may very well be in the device as well.
That's right. So it's important to think about more than just what's on the surface, and think about other aspects to it as well, like that. For example, sensitive information.
So if I'm not operating a home anesthesia device, what lesson is in this story for me about connecting devices?
I think maybe most people don't have a little hospital network with anesthesia devices, but I think almost everyone now has a small little network at home of connected devices. It could be your TV, or your entertainment system, or your gaming console, or even your fire alarm, or your thermostat. These are all connected devices, and you might not know a lot about the security implemented in them. They might also have bugs. So it's important to be aware of things like that and not assume that they are secure, because somebody might unexpectedly be able to access them or manipulate them in a way that you didn't want.
Well, thanks, Dan. That's it for this week's ThreatTraq Essentials. As always, you can click on the playlist below to take a deeper dive into any of these stories. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.